All right, everyone. I wanted to post a bit of a walkthrough to the first assignment, the visual report. And the reason I wanted to do this is because some students have found this assignment to be somewhat daunting. I think this may be the case largely because of the conceptual or theoretical nature of the assignment. So hopefully providing this walkthrough will make the assignment seem a little bit less intimidating. So first off, I'll say that despite this assignment being due at the end of week 5, get started on it now. Thus, I'll say read through assignment 1 if you haven't done so already. So go to the evaluations, click it, and you should see a tab for the visual assignment. So worth 15% of the overall mark. The next thing I'll say is that each of Module 1, Module 2, Module 3, and Module 4 have relevance to this assignment. And if you've already gone through the first two modules, hopefully you recognize that. And as you go through Modules 3 and 4, look for how they are relevant to the assignment, although I'll provide you a little bit of guidance here. So what is the visual report asking you to do? So it's essentially asking you to create and explain your own visual conceptual framework for analyzing some aspect of cults, or to research and provide a visual illustration and textual explanation of an existing conceptual framework used to analyze some sort of phenomenon regarding cults. So, what is a visual framework? Now, you've actually been introduced to a few already, and this includes a couple in Module 1. So, what else? So you'll note in this particular file associated with Module 1, we used this collection of visuals, 5 actually, to identify the elements that are present among groups in order to define them or qualify them as cults. And this is one of the options that I'm asking you to do, is to create a visual representation for something pertaining to cults. In this particular case, we're identifying the defining features or characteristics of cults and are representing them in a graphical manner. The other framework that was illustrated in Module 1 can be found in A Look at the Continuum. And it's here where we have this framework developed by Stark and Bainbridge from their published work entitled Of Churches, Sects, and Cults, Preliminary Concepts for a Theory of Religious Movements. So that's an article that they wrote quite some time ago. And their article looks, or the framework that's revealed here, looks at the degree to which groups' practices and or belief systems align or don't align with mainstream society. And I actually think it's important to show you the original work here. So you see the visual here, but this visual is derived from established research. So here's the article Of Churches, Sects, and Cults, and so forth, from which that visual was derived. And you'll note that this is a 16-page article. And although I'll encourage you to read it all, or at least peruse it, because what that visual represents that you saw earlier depicts what's written here. But within this original article, there is not a single graphic whatsoever. So we've read through this module and have created this graphic to illustrate what it's trying to represent. So really, that is also, or alternatively, what I'm asking you to do. So either come up with your own visual framework, or to find an article or some sort of academic work and create a visual given its textual or verbal description. So we were introduced to a couple of these visual frameworks in the first module. Module 2 also contains a visual framework. Every cult has a focus. Here we go. And in this case, we created a visual to illustrate that cults tend to fall into one of 4 categories that highlight their different emphasis or focus. So this visual framework isn't really based on any one piece of work, but rather on a wide reading of the literature. And as you read more about cults, you'll start to identify patterns or commonalities across those cults. So providing this visual allows us to organize or categorize cults according to these particular patterns or commonalities. And in this particular case, it's the area of focus, whether it be more political in orientation, more theistic in orientation, metaphysical, or scientific in organization. So this is a graphic that allows us to quickly represent where cults tend to lie on that. I'll call it a spectrum. So here's yet another visual representation of that information. Now, Module 3, Understanding the Cult Phenomenon, actually kind of formally introduces you to frameworks. And in this module, it's particularly useful when it comes to choosing a particular visual that you may want to use in your visual framework. So at the very least, note that there are generically speaking, two types of frameworks. There are conceptual frameworks and there are process frameworks. So here are just some examples of those process frameworks, and these outline the way in which actions occur, kind of like identifying a step-by-step process. There are also content frameworks, and these don't necessarily represent steps within a process, but rather relationships within a phenomenon. And again, these can be represented differently as well. So depending on the type of phenomenon that interests you with respect to cults, you may want to represent it in one of these two ways, either through a process framework or through one of these content frameworks. The other important piece about Module 3, not only does it introduce you to frameworks, these visual frameworks, but it also walks you through the process of creating a visual framework based on existing research. So again, we go back to that original work by Stark and Bainbridge, and it actually then identifies another framework that's kind of a derivative of this continuum of social alignment. And it looks at several different things, again, based on this original research. It looks at the level of organization of groups. It looks at the quality of compensators or so-called rewards that are provided to members. Also addresses the level of mysticism present within groups, the demands of membership, as well as what's already represented in the continuum of social alignment, the degree of tension or alignment with mainstream society. And based on that research, or based on those differences, they've identified 3 different kinds of cults: the audience cults, client cults, and cult movements. And as you go further within this module, you'll start to see how these different categories of groups differ with respect to each of those specific phenomena. And potentially, a little bit later on, you can then identify a particular framework visual framework that you may want to use when illustrating those particular phenomena. In this case, the 3 different types of groups. So by looking at this graphic, you get an idea as to how they differ from one another, yet relate to one another. So in modules, again, 1 and 2, you're introduced to a number of different visual frameworks. In module 3, introduced to different types of frameworks, as well as the process through which you can create your visual framework. And then again, in Module 4, there's actually a section that deals with research, because you're going to have to do some research to engage in this assignment. So Module 4 not only shows you the importance of doing research, it shows you how to engage in that research, where to go to gather those resources, and how to assess information. Okay, so I'm asking you to, in this assignment, go to some sort of academic source. It could be the information you find within the course itself, or you can go beyond the course and start to look up either scholarly articles, information from textbooks, whatever it might be, to help you generate that framework and ultimately create a visual that helps explain it. So getting back to the actual assignment, remember that in addition to creating the actual visual framework, that it asks you to describe it. So including providing written descriptions of the key words or central concepts included in your actual framework. So again, assume that the person reading it knows nothing about what you're trying to write about. So make sure it is very clear to the reader what it is that you're representing. So the visual provides that one interpretation, but you may be introducing concepts or categories that the reader may not be able to understand. So provide a written explanation as well. I guess one final note, I'll create a discussion board exclusively devoted to this first assignment. So if you have questions about it, please post them there. And I'll also encourage you to advertise your research. So by that I mean that if you come across an article or a resource that you think might be beneficial to not just you, but potentially your classmates, feel free to post it. And hopefully this clears up a few things. So best of luck with the assignment.